Good morning, guys, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Andy Shepherd. I'm the clinical lead at ReadyCare. So in today's session, in order to mark tomorrow being National Wellbeing at Work Day, just wanted to cover one of the most important things when it comes to your health, and that is what you eat. So we've heard this kind of truism, this sort of you are what you eat sort of a stuff. But I mean, how true that is, it just can't be understated. It really can't. So the vast majority of chronic diseases that we die from prematurely, vast majority of them, are driven by processed food, things like sugar, refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, not meat and saturated fat and cheese and eggs like we used to think, but refined processed food. So it's really important from a what you eat point of view that you have an idea of the basics of what would constitute a diet that will help you avoid chronic disease and really be truly well. And also how you would go about structuring that. Now, one huge caveat I have to say, and this is from someone who, for the last maybe 7 or 8 years, actually longer, 9 or 10 years, has been up and down on the road doing talks on this sort of stuff. And then I pull into the likes of no offense, Topaz, but a Topaz or a Garage. And I look around and I just see a chemical storm. I see everything that's trying to kill you being pushed in your face as you walk up to the counter. I mean, I've gone into Topaz and gotten looks because I've said to him, look, can I just get 2 boiled eggs? And I go up with a bottle of sparkling water and 2 boiled eggs. And that's it. You know, everything else, refined carbohydrates, breads, granola bars, cereal, Mars bars, snacks, just everything. I mean, if you think about what a snack is and what food on the road is as you're grabbing stuff on the go, it's stuff that is cheap to make, has cheap ingredients, will taste good and get you going back for more and not last too long in your bloodstream. So they've manufactured these foods to be as addictive as possible in the short term, and that will last 4 or 5 months on the shelf. And egg, meat, fruits, vegetables, for the most part, don't fit into that box, so they're not profitable. They're not going to last long on the shelves. So culturally, the whole system, environmentally, you're kind of set up to fail. So it's important to know what food choices to make, and that's what I'm going to cover in today's session. So let's jump into this. All right, so don't mind the title, how to pack your lunchbox. I don't really mean just how to pack your lunchbox, but we'll talk through the basics of that as well. Just a little bit on our background. We do know what we're talking about when it comes to metabolic health and preventing disease. We've won a couple of awards, from the International Scholar Award to the Clinical Pharmacy Congress Award, and we publish our outcomes at international medical meetings. Okay, this is just an interesting slide. So the idea, first of all, when you're choosing a food, that you should just keep an eye on calories and eat low-fat foods, and that's going to stop you getting overweight, getting heart disease, diabetes, and so on. That whole idea, which is known as the lipid heart hypothesis, popularized by not only, but to a significant degree, Ansel Keys and many others in that kind of boat that said it's all about calories in, calories out, and it's somehow your fault, you're eating too much, and you're to blame, which is nonsense. We know the whole food environment has set us up to fail. Those guidelines were put into place in the late 70s. The idea of these guidelines was, if we tell people to eat lower calorie foods, they'll eat less calories, and obesity will slow down. It'll stop. It'll get down to 4 or 5%. Now, take one look at the graph and tell me, at 12.7%, did it get better or worse over the preceding 20 or 30 years? Obesity not only didn't slow down. Look at 1970 to 1978. There was a 0.5% increase in obesity. Now, with the implementation of the low-fat guidelines that year, the 10 years after, it went from 12.7 to 20.5. The following decade up 8%, the following decade up 8%, the following decade up 5 or 6%. So obesity is exploding at an exponential rate never seen before in human civilization, but only in the Western world. So in remote tribes around the world who didn't get the memo that it might be fat and it might be too many calories and you're not doing enough exercise, independent of exercise status, that's really important. So often people's response to that would say, oh, but they're out hunting and they're doing more exercise. No, independent of steps of activity, whether they're out hunting for 4 hours a day or whether they're staying back and taking care of kids or they're elderly or infirm, there is no explosion in obesity, heart disease, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome, erectile dysfunction, and so on. All of these diseases that we know are driven by chronic disease. And again, excuse the typos there, it just comes across differently on the streaming platform. The slide actually looks fine. So we see these tribes with extreme longevity independent of exercise status, eating red meat, internal organs, and fat, following what's known as a nose-to-tail diet. So they eat all parts of the animal, loads of fat. You know, some of these Canadian Inuits, for example, surviving on seal blubber and fat and caribou and all that sort of stuff. Eating all the stuff we were told might be bad for us and might increase our rates of obesity, cancer, diabetes, all that sort of stuff, red meat and internal organs, yet they don't get any of those chronic diseases, independent of exercise status. So something else is at play. And I would argue, and I'm not the only one arguing it, this is the general consensus in the health science community, is that it is processed food, the avoidance of processed food. So you would see in, sorry, the map didn't come up here either, but anyway, in the what we call the blue zones of our planet, the initial narrative around the blue zones, which was absolutely an incorrect interpretation of the literature, was to say that, well, in the blue zones, they eat more vegetables. They also eat a ton of meat in some of them. So if you look, for example, at Sardinia in Italy, they eat a whole food diet, high in vegetables. They do have olive oil. They also have homemade pasta, which is interesting that you can consume that stuff in moderation, especially the kind of purer version and the less refined version compared to what we have here in the other side, in the Western world. The more commercialized versions of those pastas and rice are much worse for you. They follow a whole food diet, high in vegetables, also high in fats, cheese, fish, and fatty lamb. No heart disease, extreme longevity. The Okinawans in Japan, high carb, high fiber diet, but they also have, no, high carb, high fiber is interesting because you can have a high carb diet if you're having things like, you know, you're having potatoes, you're having a bit of pasta. But if you have no Doritos, Ben & Jerry's, takeaways, granola bars, frozen pizzas, and the worst of what you're having from a carbohydrate point of view is high fiber carbohydrates, broadly speaking, you'll be extremely healthy. That's referred to as a kind of a whole food or paleo type approach. So all carbs are not created equal. Refined carbs, without a shadow of a doubt, are driving the vast majority of chronic diseases seen in the Western world. But over in the Okinawans in Japan, they also have a lot of fish and pork. So what all of these areas have in common, this puts to bed the argument that, you know, well, there's vegetarian tribes, vegetarian Indian populations that are very healthy. There's also the Maasai tribe who eat nothing but meat and fat and blood and all that milk and like huge amounts of animal products and almost no fruits and vegetables, and they never get sick either. So which of them has it correct? Actually, both of them, because the commonality there is the avoidance of processed food. That's the key message to take away from today. Okay, if we look at weight gain, and you guys will be sick of hearing about insulin if you're listening to any of the stuff I do, but your pancreas is an internal organ that sits just in behind your rib cage off the tail end of your stomach. And that is a hormone that produces, an organ that produces a hormone called insulin. Now, insulin is produced in response to anything you eat to varying degrees. If you eat fat, it barely moves insulin. If you eat protein, it has a kind of a pulsatile effect on what are known as the beta islet cells in the pancreas that produce a bit of insulin every now and again to keep stuff under control. If you eat refined carbohydrates, so think granola bars, breakfast cereals, frozen pizzas, muffins, all of that sort of stuff, you look at it and you go, well, Deirdre and Skinny World said these are great because they're only 80 calories. Your body has no clue how many calories are in it. Calories are a unit of energy for when you burn a food in a lab. We are not a Bunsen burner. We're not some sort of a calorimeter. We're not as simple as that. And unfortunately, the food industry and the big food, if you want to call them that, the companies who make lots of processed food, would have pushed forward the idea that it's all about calories in, calories out. I mean, Coca-Cola, for example, I'm not slating any particular company. This is well understood and well documented. Coca-Cola built a foundation called the Energy Balance Foundation to push forward rubbish studies that said a calorie is a calorie. It's all about calories in, calories out. You just need to eat less calories. And by the way, our can of Coca-Cola with all the sugar is only 80 calories. So, I mean, that's roughly the same as half an avocado. So why wouldn't you have it? You know, all calories are the same, including ours, which is absolute nonsense. Because you know, if you took avocados and eggs out of your diet and had cream eggs and Coke for the same amount of calories instead, you'd end up diabetic with PCOS and fatty liver and you know, everything else going wrong from a weight around the midsection and metabolic train wreck scenario. So refined carbohydrates drive insulin. So basically all dietary carbohydrates, it's amazing how many people haven't got this yet, and it's so crucial for your health. All refined carbs, breads, breakfast cereals, granola bars, frozen pizzas, all that sort of grainy, beigey based food that we really don't need is all metabolized as sugar in your blood. And this is the hardest one to pardon the pun to swallow, is even porridge. People think porridge is super healthy for you. It's absolutely not. It's very well understood. All dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as glucose. So your bowl of porridge is metabolized down as about 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, depending on the portion size, spoons of sugar in your blood. Now, that's not to say that there are 14 spoons of sugar in a bowl of porridge. It's not to say that at all, but all dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as sugar in your blood. And this is very well documented in the Journal of Insulin Resistance. Dr. David Unwin published a study where he said a bowl of porridge is roughly the same as 14 spoons of sugar. So he looked at, if I give the patient a bowl of porridge, and then if I give the patient on a different day 14 spoons of sugar melted down, roughly where would they end up? So what's the spoons of sugar equivalent in common foods? A potato is 7 or 8 spoons of sugar equivalent. 2 Weetabix is about 9 spoons of sugar or 10 spoons of sugar equivalent, and so on. All dietary carbohydrate is metabolized as glucose in your bloodstream. Glucose triggers insulin to be produced by the pancreas, and here's the most important thing to know. Insulin is the fat storage hormone. If you don't have insulin, you waste away. All your fat drips off you and you waste away. And that's seen in type 1 diabetics. So type 1 is the body's inability to produce insulin and store fat because your pancreas is inappropriately attacking itself. It's actually an autoimmune condition. So before the advent of exogenous insulin, before insulin was developed and could be synthesized from, interestingly enough, they actually make it from yams, which are like a sweet potato-y type thing that grow below the ground, the tuber vegetable. They synthesize the hormones from that. And if you were back in the 1920s, I think the advent of exogenous insulin was around 1926, 27, something like that. Before that, if you had type 1 diabetes as a child, it was a death sentence. So if you were 5 or 6 or 7 and you showed up as being type 1 diabetic, they would say, get your affairs in order for the kid. It's just, get stuff ready because they have 3 to 6 months to live. And you would see a rapid wasting of body fat, and then your muscle would start to catabolize or eat itself to provide energy because there was no fat there. And now type 1s live almost as long as anyone else because they just inject the insulin. The point there I'm trying to illustrate is insulin is the fat storage hormone. And insulin is really important. Insulin resistance, which is your body's inability to make insulin because it's been producing it at too high a level for too long, drives diabetes. That's the very definition of diabetes, is not being able to produce enough insulin or use it effectively. High blood pressure, it's involved in epilepsy. Dyslipidemia means it throws off your cholesterol levels, so your good cholesterol goes down, your triglycerides go up. Obesity is driven by it, which is the whole point of today's session. PCOS and fertility issues, the polycystic ovarian syndrome, the leading cause of infertility in women of reproductive age. It's almost 1 in 3 females by the time they're in their late 20s will have PCOS. That's driven mostly by diet. Cancer, there's an argument out there that the vast majority of hormone-positive cancers are driven by glucose dysregulation, so blood sugar levels being high, and a lot of neurological disorders as well, even mental health disorders, sleep apnea too, are driven again by high blood sugar levels. So what's very clear from the literature, really, really obvious, is if you want to reduce your risk of the vast majority of chronic diseases, look after your blood sugar levels. Don't fall into this nonsense kind of hype and hyperbole from the food industry that would say to you, a calorie is a calorie, and this, we call this a skinny yogurt or a diet yogurt. The labeling is for the most part nonsense. I look at nothing else when I look at a food item other than carbohydrates and sugar. I want carbs and sugar to be as low as possible. If it's fat, high as possible. If it's protein, high as possible. And for the most part, we take the approach as a family of shopping on the outskirts, which is easier said than done because I know all the nice stuff is in the inner aisles. But think about that. You go into a supermarket and you've got on the outside meat, eggs, fruits, vegetables, dairy, fish counter. Think of your typical super value setup all around on the outskirts. Everything in the inner aisles, with the exception of toiletries and all that sort of stuff, everything else that's a food-like item, I wouldn't even call it food, is probably going to be deleterious to your health. It's going to be harmful for your health. Okay, this is important again. So what we want to move away from, if we're trying to prevent and even reverse many chronic diseases, as we do in our work with the NHS, is we want to dial down our intake of breads, cereals, bananas, pasta, all those sort of foods. Now, the problem with this is that when we're out and when we're on the road and when we're packing lunch boxes, everything that's handy is mostly bad for your health, is mostly promoting chronic disease. Because again, stuff that we call handy, like grabbing a sandwich in the shop and the deli counter, the hot chicken, all of that stuff is it's meant to be able to sit there. Now, the hot chicken roll is a bad example, even though if you knew what went into the chicken in the hot chicken roll, the plastic goo, the pink goo that they put into it is horrendous. It's not even a first cousin of chicken, actually. But if you knew, so basically, sorry, the point I was trying to make is foods that are handy, that are easy to pick up and sit on the shelf and sit in the deli counter under a bit of heat and don't really change and can last a long time, is not conducive to good health at all. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of foods that we want to eat less of, and then foods that we want to include. And I'll give you some practical examples. So we want to dial down, because of the action on insulin and weight gain and your cholesterol levels and your blood pressure, we want to have less the breads and cereals and the beigey type foods that actually your body has zero requirement for. Zero, really important there, that I hold strong on that one, because people will say, oh, but you need carbs for energy. Nope, you can use carbohydrates for energy. Your body requires a tiny amount of glucose to fuel your internal organs, which you can get from a process called gluconeogenesis, which is a conversion from protein. So the minimum amount of carbohydrates you need for optimal human health, and I would argue you'd be way healthier if you didn't eat any, and you'd probably live a whole lot longer. Minimum amount of carbs you need is 0. I'm not saying all carbs are bad necessarily, but less bread, rice, pasta, cereals, cakes, pastries, and pull away from that myopic focus on calories and thinking it's all about calories. I promise you that's a game that just doesn't fare out well. And try to eat more of these kind of real foods. So here's where the challenge is. It's difficult to get meat and fish and cheese, not cheese so much, green vegetables, full fat dairy. Yeah, you could grab a bag of a pack of raspberries if you could get it on the go, and full fat dairy. But these are all good from a lunchbox point of view. So the most important thing to remember is, let me just bring this off again for a second, is when you're packing your lunchbox, you want to pack it with stuff that you know won't spike your blood sugar levels. So basically that's going to be, the main ones here are meat, salads, vegetables, fruits in the berry category, so strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, all that sort of stuff. Cheese, salami, and people will talk about salami and they say, oh, but processed red meat. Again, that's epidemiological research. I've never proved anything. I think the least of your worries is processed red meat or those pepperami type things, if you are considering it as an alternative to like a granola bar or something like that. So prioritize protein and fill up on fat is a really good way of thinking about it. Cut carbs, that's the C. The P for protein, prioritize protein, and the F for fat, fill up on fat. So Greek yogurt, berries. When we put our kids are on a kind of a strict enough diet, only because my son had a neurological issue when he was young, so we wanted him on kind of low carb ketogenic type stuff, which has improved his health massively, hugely. But we give him kind of pepperoni type, salami type things. We'll give them cheese, we'll give them nuts, we'll give them Greek yogurt with berries, dark chocolate. All of those things are great. So when you're packing your lunchbox, a really good way of doing it would be cook something up. If this is viable for you, cook something up the night before, like a kind of a, look up any low carb recipe and overcook it, batch cook it, and then pop it into the lunchbox. And if you have a microwave or an oven at work that you can pop it into, fantastic. If you can't, salads, stir fries, that sort of stuff would be great. When I used to go into Readycare, when I was really getting deep into all this research, I'd bring a tomato and buffalo mozzarella type salad with me. I'd go over, if I was stuck in a Super Value or something like that, I'd go salads would be the main thing that I get. If I was going to a restaurant, I'd always get stir fries, because again, you're away from the inflammatory and disease promoting kind of rice and pasta and all that sort of stuff. If you're on the go, the best advice I can give to you if you're driving a truck or you're stopping off at Topaz's and places like that is, I would always bring 4 or 5 things in the car with me when I was on the road. I would always have a packet of like pecan nuts or something like that, just anything with the exception of peanuts, which tend to be deep fried in inflammatory seed oils. Any type of nuts. I bring raspberries, blueberries, blackberries in a kind of a little container. It does take a little bit of prep just to chuck stuff into the car. I might bring little slices of cheese sort of stuff. I might bring cold meats. Dark chocolate always was a staple for me on the road. Dark chocolate is much lower in sugar and much higher in healthy fat, which will keep you fuller for longer as well. So the main thing here is think about ways that you can combine real foods. So the real foods, again, are any foods that you can get when you shop around the outskirts. So you've got meat, fish, fruits, vegetables, and dairy. So again, think about dairy snacks. So full fat dairy always. Just look for low sugar. If you're bringing yogurts, for example, low carb, low sugar, higher in fat. So like a real unflavored Greek yogurt, and pop in some berries on top of it, pop in some nuts, bring dark chocolate with you. When I'm on the road, I'll bring sadnol, as this is. I'll bring a container of cream in a thermos flask so it stays cold. I get a black coffee on the road. I have my dark chocolate and my nuts in the car, and I pour the cream into the coffee. It will not clog up your arteries like we used to believe. In fact, it'll help you lose weight as part of a lower carb whole food diet. All right, guys, I hope that's given you some, pardon the pun, food for thought. But just as it's the, as this kind of topic comes up around this time of year, the National Wellbeing at Work Day, it's really important to remember the easy thing to do is the crackers and the granola bars and the raisins and just the sugary carbohydrate-based stuff. But that stuff is going to promote chronic disease. Sorry, one thing I forgot, boiled eggs. Boiled eggs are a savior. I would always bring them in the car with me or bring them into work. If you want to lose weight, improve your cholesterol, improve your blood pressure, and just feel a million times better overall from a cognitive performance point of view, bring 3 boiled eggs and a bit of mayonnaise and a bit of salt with you into work. I used to do it all the time as well. So batch cook up stuff from the night before, bring it in the container, look up you'll see it on our recipe on controldtx.com, or look up any low carb or keto type recipe and batch cook that up. But whatever you do, bring food that you put together where you shopped on the outskirts. Meat, fish, vegetables, fruit, dairy, all of those grain-based foods are going to be driving chronic disease. Guys, have a good day at work together. National Wellbeing at Work. Try and put some effort into prepping the meals. It is worth it in the long run. So we either pay now or we pay later with our health. Guys, have a good day, and I'll see you at the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.